The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, it's been a couple of days since the Toronto Maple Leafs announced that they would not be renewing the contract of Brendan Shanahan, and they won't replace him. One of many takeaways from the press conference held by Keith Pelley of MLSE, a lot of takeaways, I'm sure, from that presser. We should start with Brendan Shanahan and him no longer being part of the Leafs. What can you say about that situation? And then we can get into more from that presser.
Well, with the dust settling here a little bit now, I think it's clear that we can say this is just a matter of the results catching up to Brendan Shanahan. That, you know, for all the things that you might comb through and decisions and this and that, I mean, two things are true. His contract is expiring, so that did provide a point where the organization had to make a decision one way or another. Are we extending him a new one or not? And, you know, the Leafs, pretty kind of crazy the way it is, again, looking back, that I do believe a conference final appearance by this team would have been enough where ownership would have at least been of a mind that they had taken a meaningful step forward from where they've been. You know, that's not to say that that was their goal. I think clearly their goal is to win a Stanley Cup, and that's something Keith Pelley made very clear if you watched his press conference on Friday in Toronto. But, you know, I think that they could have looked at that and said, okay, this is the first time since 2002 for our organization. You know, 23 years, a long time. And, you know, quite frankly, I mean, we never know which way butterfly effect things would go. But when you look at the time Florida's having right now against Carolina, had the Leafs got to the conference final, it's entirely possible they themselves would be marching towards a Stanley Cup final as Florida is now. So, you know, you look back and an 11-year run, in essence, gets decided by one game. And now, if you want to peel into that onion a little deeper, you might say, well, it's two games, game 5 and 7 at home, which the Leafs lost both of them 6-1. Both of them saw at least one jersey thrown on the ice. Both of them saw a lot of fan unrest. If you want to go even deeper than that, well, they were ahead in game 3 by a couple goals a couple times. And, you know, there was ways that the Leafs won that series. I think if they win that series, we're not talking about this. I mean, I do believe that that's how thin in the end the margins were. But what's interesting now is that Keith Pelley, Julian, he has a different voice than what you hear at these sort of hockey type of press conferences. Now, this is the guy who lived a long time in Europe, ran the European Golf Tour, now called the DP World Tour, you know, was with Team Europe at the Ryder Cup. I think a lot of what he draws on for, you know, basically how he wants an organization to function, he learned in seeing the way the European Ryder Cup team functions, which even just that alone is not common, not something you hear referenced at these sort of things. And even deeper than that, he just talks a lot about European soccer. You know, he's obviously very familiar with the business of those teams, how they operate, where the expectations are. And, you know, he looks at the Leafs like a Real Madrid or any of the major world's, you know, soccer teams, football teams, and says, basically, you have a different level of following. Like it almost transcends in some ways the league, because you have such a strong brand. You have, you know, in this case, the Leafs have just been around for so long, like the Canadians and a few other teams, but you have such a deep and loyal following that goes well beyond the borders of your city, and people are starving for that team to have success. And so it's a long way of getting back to the point that I think really the internal expectations change a lot with him gone, because I think Brendan Shanahan, you know, the Shanahan plan was a thing. Before it was a meme, it really was a thing. I think it was actually pretty smart in its conception at that time. The Leafs were a friggin' mess when Brendan Shanahan was hired. And he basically said, we're going to make a plan. We're going to stick to it. And I think for a lot of years, that the best things that happened on the ice with Brendan Shanahan as the Leafs president happened because he made that plan, because it was smart, and because he was disciplined in it. You know, the thing at the end, though, is he didn't want to change gears, right? He was very rigid about how he viewed that plan. And so I think he, as a result, ended up tolerating a level of results that will just not be tolerated around here anymore. And so that doesn't guarantee success, of course, but I think the stakes have been raised. That's what I come away from that press conference feeling, is that it's not as though Brendan Shanahan, of course, he wanted the team to win the Stanley Cup. He poured a lot of hours and time into trying to achieve that aim, but I think he became more concerned at times about protecting kind of the star players of the team, the core four, and not really, he lost sight of some of the bigger picture here that maybe you have to make some people uncomfortable to win. And maybe you have to get uncomfortable yourself in your decision making. Maybe you have to make a trade that's a difficult trade to make, part with a certain player. Anyway, I mean, it's a real interesting pivot point for this organization. And I talked for 5 minutes off of one question. But the other thing I'd add here is that the Leafs reasonably probably have a 3 to 4 to 5 year window to try to win a championship with this team. And so the fact that Shanahan's out at this point, like a lot of interesting things are on the horizon because they don't have time at their backs anymore. They don't have the ability to be patient. And so I think along with Shanahan's office being cleared out, any notion of patience or incremental progress being enough, that's been wiped right off the slate here.
Before I ask more about the Leafs, I wonder what is next for Brendan Shanahan. I mean, there was the connection to the New York Islanders, but the Islanders have since hired Mathieu Darche as their GM, and it looks like they're not going to hire a president. So if you're Brendan Shanahan, what do you do?
I think you just sit there and wait and see what opportunities come about. I mean, I'll go back to this point. I think for whatever you may think of this move or that move that happened during his tenure in Toronto, and there's lots of them that you could debate. You and I could probably make, like, what were the 5 lowlights of that era? And we might have different lists because there's plenty to choose from. But the one thing I can't get past is very few people have his skill set, have his gravitas, have had the career he had as a player, have had the career he's had as an executive, right? And so, he had a discussion with the Islanders. It doesn't sound like that's going to materialize in anything at this point in time, but it would not surprise me in the least. And I don't know anything as we're recording tonight, but it would not surprise me if some other team that doesn't even really have an opening is already wanting to talk to him and seeing, hey, could there be a fit here? And so I think that he has, at age 56, with lots of years left to work, I mean, I think he has a real opportunity to do basically anything. I imagine it's going to be having a president type of role with another team. Some teams are playing with the titles being tossed around. So maybe it isn't exactly labeled that, but basically the person at the top of a hockey operations department for a team that can, rub arms at the ownership level. I mean, he was an alternate governor for the Leafs. He attended many, many board of governors meetings, meaning, those are the highest level, highest powered meetings the league has. He was attending those on behalf of the Leafs for years. He obviously has a pretty good understanding of how the league itself operates, how a team should operate, knows how to really, maybe I should be his agent, but I just feel like there's a lot of things that he can do. And there's not a ton of people that have basically the highest level executive C-suite kind of resume that he has in the hockey world. That's not to say there aren't smart executives, or aren't people maybe that can be plucked from outside the hockey world, but he has a unique, double duo that he has full credibility within the hockey world, played in the league, is in the Hockey Hall of Fame, won Stanley Cups, played for Team Canada, the whole bit, knows everybody because it is the smallest town on earth, the hockey world. And on top of that has legitimate, he's been reporting to a board of Rogers and Bell and some of the most senior high level people in Canada on the business community. So, I think that's going to lead him to some other very promised position. I would think the league, the league's at a time, Gary Bettman's not stepping aside, but you look at Gary Bettman's age, Colin Campbell, who runs the hockey operations department for the NHL. I mean, all these guys don't have much longer left. I mean, I would think the league would view him as an asset if he wanted to go back and work at the NHL at a pretty high level. I think teams will have the same view of him. So, the one thing I'm confident of is he doesn't have to just take the first job that comes his way. He's been well compensated over the years. I'm sure he can afford to go some time between paychecks if that's what it takes. And I think he should be selective with his next role because he's got that unique of kind of blend of experiences and really just he can sit at a podium and command the room, right? He just knows, very well spoken, well presented guys. So I don't know where that opportunity is going to land. the fact that one team was already knocking at the door before he's, really even officially been let go by the Leafs tells you, I think, that he can basically do anything he wants. You could tell me he was a future commissioner in the NHL, and that wouldn't surprise me. That's how much. I'm not saying that's where he's going to work, but I don't think something like that would be impossible. I mean, we're talking with someone with really rare set of skills. Let's
make sure we clip that last part just in case that actually happens. Brendan Shanahan, future NHL commissioner, successor to Gary Bettman, whenever that should happen. In all seriousness, though, I think you bring up some really good points. Like, if I'm a franchise like Seattle, I don't know why Seattle's in my brain, but if I want to get to the next level, at least try to make myself a little bit more of a contender, at least just like a better team. Like, why not at least think about bringing in someone like Brendan Shanahan to at least change the standard?
Right. And they have Ron Francis there, right? And like in a weird way, Ron Francis is one of the people that has almost had equivalent sort of skill set, and that he also was one of the top scoring players of all time as a player in the Hockey Hall of Fame, has spent a long time running the Carolina Hurricanes, then going to Seattle. I mean, he's been an assistant coach in the league. Like, he's done a little bit of everything. And so he's one of the few others out there that can maybe make the same kind of claim as Brendan. Mm-hmm. But, the one box I guess he's not ticking is Shanahan also had 5 years working at the league head office on top of all that. So, but there are a lot of teams that don't have presidents now. I think we can debate this, to bring it back to the Leafs. Like, the one thing that I did think is, people, it's easy to say, oh, what does a president do? Because I get it. Most fans of a team, you're worried about what's on the ice. And that whether it was Lou Lamoriello or Kyle Dubas or Brad Treliving, that Brendan Shanahan, well, he did have some say and was obviously part of the meetings, wasn't making the call on the fourth line left winger that's lining up that night, most likely. But, there's a lot of other things that happen when you run a team like the Maple Leafs and any of the original six teams are like this. A lot of the other Canadian teams that have a big history. I mean, there's, when Boreas Salming got ALS diagnosis, the Leafs made sure to get him and his family over here to Toronto. They sent a team of alumni over to a game that was played in Sweden, and probably many other things I don't even know about. But the point is somebody has to spearhead those efforts, right? And, that's not going to be Brad Treliving in this new world. I can't imagine. I mean, he might have a suggestion to someone like, hey, I heard of this thing. Maybe we should make sure we're doing, X, Y, and Z correctly about this, whatever issue that's come up that maybe impacts our team or our brand or our history, our franchise. But I mean, he's also got to be out there worried about the draft list and a whole bunch of other more day-to-day operations. Like, I think a big team like the Leafs does need someone looking out for the big picture. And so, while the plan right now is not to have anyone in that president's role and for Keith Pelley to be more actively involved, working with Brad Treliving and Craig Berube, I just wonder if over time they're going to need someone. Again, maybe don't call it president. Maybe it's vice president. Come up with a title, but brand ambassador. I have no idea. But you might need someone that's really looking out for the big picture of the organization and that they're doing all the right things. Because, I look at the Canadians, like the one thing that Montreal always gets flowers for, and I think correctly, is the way they do ceremonies, the way they've looked after their alumni, the way that they just seem to have the right tone and touch because they understand how important their brand is and how their team and their franchise has been to so many people in a province and beyond. I think the Leafs have not hit that standard, but a lot of those things did improve under Shanahan, retiring the numbers. They created Legends Row. Dave Keon was voted the top Leaf when they did the 100 best Leafs of all time. He was completely incommunicado with the Leafs organization for many, many years. And Brendan Shanahan, managed to have that no longer be the case. And Dave Keon appeared, for example, at the All-Star weekend. He's done more things where he's been back around the team. I mean, I think it's important when you have a big team, a big brand, that you have someone looking out for those aims. I think Keith Pelley can do some of that stuff. But, keep in mind, he's also in charge of the Toronto Raptors, Toronto FC in the MLS, the Toronto Argos in the CFL. I mean, his job, and he's reporting up to, ownership. That's probably a full-time job in itself. Usually when you're reporting to very, very powerful people, there's probably a lot of things that he's got to take care of as part of that job. So, I still think that there's room for someone in the middle there. Now, the question is, with that someone, does that person have a say in the hockey decisions or not? And that's to be determined. In the short term, we know it's going to be not. And so the Leafs are moving forward here. Kind of, it's an interesting structure. I think there's still a lot that needs to be clarified. I mean, Keith Pelley and Brad Treliving are only having dinner on Sunday night because Brad Treliving was out of town for his daughter's graduation. So like they're just sitting down as we're recording this essentially to start charting the way forward. So how this is going to work is still, I think, it's like day 3 of planning a long-term project. It's still not entirely clear, but it's going to be a different feel. I think people that just think Brendan Shanahan drew a big paycheck and what else did he do? I think they're probably missing a lot of the touches and just how much impact he had from top to bottom in the organization for 11 years, a long period of time in pro sports.
You touched on Brad Treliving, and feel free to add more on that for my next question. But I'm also curious about not just what it could look like for him in this structure, but also Craig Berube, because it seems like he's also getting some changes with his position. Well, I mean, he, of course, still head coach, but he might have more of a say in this new world as well.
Yeah, it was fascinating that he had dinner with Keith Pelley on Thursday. And yes, on one hand, it's just a dinner. But on the other hand, well, I think a lot of NHL head coaches will know their owners, might cross paths with them at certain ceremonies or in the hallway, say hello, tip a cap, shake a hand, how's the family? I don't think that a lot of owners get that. And Keith Pelley doesn't own the lease, but he's ownership's representative in this scenario that he's having dinner with the head coach. And one thing Pelley said to reporters, he said he's an invaluable asset to this organization. I mean, you get the sense it was a little bit more than just like, hey, he's done a nice job coaching the team and we like him. It felt like they want to lean on, one thing Pelley's big on is establishing a certain culture within the organization. And I think that they see Craig Berube as a culture setter. And frankly, I think they should. I mean, even as a head coach, I would say that he's stronger at getting a team to do certain things than maybe breaking down an X's and O's part of the game. It's not to say he can't do that, but I think he's much stronger on buy-in, on how he handles people, on, what he demands. I think he sets a certain standard, but, I think he's really, he excels really, if you look at his skill set at bringing a group together. And maybe is not as much about the X's and O's part of the game. I mean, lots of coaches, head coaches are great at one and not as great at the other. And that's why you have assistants. And, look, there's all kinds of ways to get to the desired place. But I just think it's interesting that he appears to be in the inner circle. Now, does that mean he has actual say on personnel matters? I still think Brad Treliving is making the final call on any moves made. And, Brad Treliving to me strikes me as a very collaborative type of GM. I think he's an excellent communicator. I think he likes to talk to people on the phone. He likes to flush out ideas. I think he's a well-prepared GM. He doesn't just go off the belt, right? He's not just oh, this seems like a good idea, let's do it. And so I think he would always be seeking out those opinions. But it just, it feels like in this new world, Berube has a little bit more say, at least for now. And that's wild on a couple fronts. First of all, he's 1 year into his time in Toronto. Second of all, I was saying that Brendan Shanahan paid the price for a 6-1 loss in Game 7. I mean, in some circumstances, you might be asking, do we have the right coach? Was the team prepared enough? Why did that happen? And clearly that doesn't seem to be the case. I think they feel on balance, enough good things happen this year that they feel comfortable with Berube as a coach. But, this is... It's very unusual. I can't think of, Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh, he had a line to ownership, right? And he had a contract unlike any other coach and definitely had the ability to influence that. I would think John Cooper, as long as he's been in Tampa and knowing the way that, Jeff Vinnick has run the Lightning and how hands-on he is, but not in a controlling way, but in a making sure everything's being guided in the right direction. That's a head coach who could ask his owner for something. And there's probably a few I'm missing or I'm not aware of. But the point is, it's a handful of coaches that have that kind of, basically that have that hand on the lever. I mean, most coaches show up to work, keep their head down, do their job, and they know they're going to get fired in 2.5 to 2.75 years on average. And that's about it. Most of them aren't valued in the way that you're seeing here. And I wonder if, when I talk about Pelley being, interested in European football and, even what he's seen in the golf world, I just wonder if he recognizes maybe a certain value in treating a coach a certain way when it comes to the higher level decisions being made, that could have, bring more synergy right from, the ownership right through the players. No idea if it's going to work, but it definitely felt unusual the way it was framed.
Does Pelley have a European football club he supports?
I do not know. He mentioned Liverpool last year. Like, he mentioned that going to a Liverpool game and hearing You Never Walk Alone reminded him of some of his experiences going to a Leafs playoff game and being around, the Maple Leaf Square and the way the fans were. But that doesn't mean he supports Liverpool. I do not know if he has a rooting interest in any of those teams, but he was in London area for a long time and running the golf tour. And, I just think he's a business executive at heart. He loves sports, obviously. But I think he's probably studied all these teams as brands. The other thing he said is for him, and cover your ears if you live outside Toronto, but he said for him, hockey's the greatest game on earth and the Toronto Maple Leafs are the greatest hockey team on earth. And like that they, like, he was basically saying, like, there's been all this talk about pressure and all this stuff. He's like, forget it. Like, there's no team has an experience like our team. Again, I'm just using his words, not expressing my own opinion. Don't want to go into those waters because I know there's a few passionate fan bases out there that might take issue with it. But I'm sure that he's looked at how even the Dallas Cowboys are run, how the New York Yankees are run, how Real Madrid's run, Liverpool, Man City, any of the big, huge sporting brands in the world. Like, let's face it, the Leafs are there. I think that they're clearly missing the trophies. I mean, Tottenham didn't have any trophies until recently.
Okay, I don't want to hear about Tottenham. I don't want to hear about Tottenham. Skip through them, please.
But I'm just saying, they were a pretty big brand. I mean, not on the same level as some of the other ones. Obviously, you have a much better working knowledge, and I know you love European soccer a little more than I do. But I mean, I think someone like Pelley fancies getting the Leafs more and more in those conversations globally, and I think he understands it starts with winning cups. I mean, the thing is, in our sport, there's only one cup, right? Because the President's Trophy, for whatever reason, is kind of a forgotten thing. Like, no team really makes that big of a deal. Like even Winnipeg, they win it for the first time, and it's a huge accomplishment. It's like, you get a nice tweet, and they'll put a banner, I presume, in the rafters, but that's about it. No one gets too excited about it. So you got to win the cup, and there's 32 teams trying to do that. But I think, he recognizes that's the missing piece of the puzzle. I mean, he brought up 1967 on his own during that press conference, for example. So, like, I find it interesting when we get to hear from people at that level, because it doesn't, most NHL owners don't really speak and certainly don't get that granular. In fact, I don't think Keith Pelley wants to be in front of the microphones all that much. I mean, he has to be when you're making this kind of a change. But, you're getting a sense right from, the ownership suite in around this organization, like where the expectations are, where they feel they fell short. He talked about being in the crowd in Game 7. He actually thanked the fans for the way they reacted. Like, he loved the passion, and why wouldn't you? The reason anyone gets mad enough, like, you don't celebrate, throwing a jersey on the ice in the middle of play because you don't want to encourage that, but that only happens in places where people really care, right? Like, that's the extreme emotion of, like, disappointment or anger, frustration, a little bit of all of it. But I mean, the fact they have fans that are that, I'm not going to call it any other fan bases, but there's a few other fan bases. A game like that ends and everyone looks at their watch like, all right, well, we'll get home early tonight and whatever, right? It's not, people aren't living and dying with it the same level as they are around a team like the Leafs. And frankly, when you don't win, I actually think it builds even more and more and more of that, right? Like, I don't think Red Sox fandom is on the level it was because they won a couple World Series eventually after, starving their fans and losing in the Bill Buckner era, like losing in spectacular fashion, not just losing. I mean, the Leafs are in the losing in spectacular fashion after not winning for decades phase. It's not predicting they'll win, but if they do win, you might see some of the temperature around all this dialed back too.
Yep. Winning cures everything. You still have yet to hear from Brad Treliving and management. With all these press conferences that keep happening, what do you expect to hear from that part of the Leafs front office?
Well, what's interesting there is when Treliving gets in front of a microphone this week is, he can answer a lot more about, I think at this phase, it's only 8 days since the Leafs season ended, but it's almost like it'll immediately be jumping forward. I think there'll be less of what did you see in that series against Florida or what have you, and more of like, how are you going to tackle this offseason, and what are you going to do with Mitch Marner, who, clearly does not appear to be making plans to stay in Toronto long term. How are you going to navigate the Tavares situation? What are you going to do with the cap space? I mean, I don't expect him necessarily to give all these answers and detail his plans, but I think that those will be probed because, the one thing you didn't hear from Pelley is anything about specifics on hockey matters. Like, I heard, there's some people out there that thought that he was indicating run it back. To me, that's a misread of what he was saying. I don't think he was in fact tacitly saying, I don't know what the best path forward is. That's not my expertise. That's why we have a hockey department led by Brad Treliving. And so I feel like he didn't wade into those waters in any way, shape, or form. He didn't hint. I actually think he doesn't know. And when he did that press conference, he hadn't even spoken in a proper manner to Brad Treliving since the season ended. Like they hadn't even started, getting into things privately. So, I think what we'll hear from Treliving is a little bit, get more sense from what their priorities are this offseason. Maybe a little bit on how they'll approach Marner. I don't think there's anything they can do, to be honest. I really do believe Mitch Marner is just of a mind. He's ridden this thing out. They asked him to waive his no move. He didn't do that. Like he's going to July 1st to see what's out there. You leave open the smallest percentage, whatever that sliver is, 0.1% chance that maybe it's almost like what Stamkos had back in 2016, where he did go to look at the market. He took meetings and then he went back and took a deal from, Tampa, because he peeking behind the curtain for him didn't make him want to go out and see what was out there. It was like, all right, I'm really good where I am. I don't expect that to happen here by any stretch, but there is at least a world, maybe July 1st comes and he really goes deep into some teams and sees what the offers are. And he goes, do you know what? Do I really want to leave for that or go to that place for this? Or like, I guess you can't rule it out as a possibility. I think it's a long, long, long shot, but I'd love to hear how Brad Treliving views that whole situation because, right now it's Mitch Marner's had, done 2 interviews since the season ended, kind of left it very open-ended about what he intends to do. And now we'll get to hear how the Leafs want to approach that.
Anything else about the Leafs before we wrap up an extended edition of Leafs Corner?
We'll probably have another one after that Treliving press conference, the way it's going. I mean, no, I don't have a lot of hot thoughts. I mean, Tavares will be interesting for me. Like he really, really, really wants to stay. Like not just a little bit. At this stage, his priorities are winning a Stanley Cup, and he thinks Toronto is the place to do it. Like he does not wish to see July 1st. He's coming off a season. I think it's a little bit forgotten about. He had the most goals scored of any player that's a UFA this summer, 38 goals this season. He had 74 points, I believe it was, third most points among UFAs, a long way behind his teammate Mitch Marner, who's a UFA, and Matt Duchene in Dallas had a bit more than JT. But Tavares is had one of the most productive seasons of players looking to hit the market. The expectation is that those conversations will start soon, very soon with the Leafs. They did talk throughout the year, but I think the business conversations, and to me, it's just like, can you get to the right number? Can you get a number that keeps it low enough for the Leafs to have lots of flexibility to try to build a team that can help John win a Stanley Cup in Toronto, where you're also not, offending him is the wrong word, but like, can you get it where he feels valued still? And like, can you navigate that line? Like I was thinking about this, let's just say, because I've seen people say, well, okay, sign him for $4 million and tell him take it or leave it. And look, I realize 98% of you or more listening to this podcast would love to be paid $4 million to do your job. So let's keep this just in the relative terms of what goes on in this league. If he takes 4, just playing this out, and then it comes to July 1st, and let's say they sign a lesser player for 6.5. Like, is Tavares okay with that? Like, I don't know. Like, he is a very reasonable guy, and I think he must understand that there might be an element of that. But like, how would you feel, Julian? Like, I don't know if I don't know. It's you have to remember, pride is a thing, though. Like, it is a real thing at this point in time. Especially athletes that have been in the NHL as long as John Tavares, like their needs are taken care of financially, and the money sometimes represents things other than just the dollars in your bank account and the nice trip you can take or the house you can buy or whatever. Anyway, I'm curious how all that gets navigated, but I don't see any reason why it shouldn't work, but that doesn't mean it will. And I'll tell you this, if Tavares hits the open market, I think there'll be I think people are underestimating how many teams would want to get in on that if they could, just because he is productive. He scores goals. Everything off the ice is A+. And there aren't that many centers, man. Like, you look at this free agent list, you got Sam Bennett, you have Tavares, you have Duchesne, who can be a centerman. But then you quickly get to like P.S. Suter and, other players, which I don't mean to demean them, but they're not really useful players put in the right spot. Don't get me wrong, but they're not difference makers. They're not like guys you can put on your power play one and feel good about. And so Tavares, he's actually, if he signs in Toronto, he's giving up an opportunity to go, like, who knows? Maybe a Tampa wants him. Like I could create a world where lots of teams want to pay him well and give him a good spot, but he doesn't want any part of that. I know that much from sources say he's quite anxious to stay in Toronto.
John Tavares, a point per game, if not a near point per game player at his age. If you're a team that's trying to at least get itself to being a playoff team, or if you're a team that's a contender that could use a guy like him in your lineup, oh, hell yeah, you sign up for a couple years of John Tavares. If I was a GM and I needed that piece to get myself over the top and John Tavares was interested in my team, oh yeah, I'd be very interested in John Tavares. Still a very effective player at his age. And I always found it really funny whenever I saw people complain about John Tavares as a Leaf, because fine, he's not playing at this. You're not ranking him at the same level of Austin Matthews, but he's still damn good at his age and producing for what he is. Like, I would have John Tavares on my team tomorrow.
Yeah, like his worst season in a 7-year deal. That usually when you're signing a free agent, we always say this, like, the first couple of years are all that matters, and it's going to get rough. It didn't really get that rough.
No,
like, there was a fall off. Like, he had a 47 goal season when he started in Toronto. So yes, he became a little less productive and obviously became a little less important, especially as Marner and Matthews and Nylander got better and older. Like, the natural cycle of an athlete happened there, but he was never a problem for the Leafs. Like, I mean, that's a free agent contract you take all day long. Do you know how many players? I don't even want to get naming names, but like, someone is going to sign a 29-year-old or 30-year-old free agent to like a 7-year deal this summer, and they will be saying in their front office, like, as long as he gives us 4 great years, we'll live with what happens after that, or we won't be here or whatever. Tavares did outlast Kyle Dubas, the GM who signed him, but he didn't produce at what you'd call an $11 million rate this year, but the fall off wasn't so profound that it hurt the Leafs in a real way.
And I'll tell you this much, if he's a guy who's taken that much of a discount, say $4 million, like you suggested earlier, if I'm any of those other players who are 34, 35, I'm kind of gritting my teeth a little bit, because like, this guy is producing this much and he's okay with making that much. Like, I'm thinking of
sorry.
Go ahead.
I think his number will be higher. Sorry.
Absolutely, it will be.
I see people in the market say it should be 4. Like, I think $6 million is probably about fair. And if it's 6.5, like, I think if you look at the Kopitar contract, which is 7, Giroux has just made $6.5 million in Ottawa for his 3-year deal. Pavelski made 6 to 7 in his final years and was very productive. Like, I think somewhere in that range is what's fair. But that doesn't mean, look, I think he'll also probably take a deferred money deal too. So maybe you get it down to 5. We'll have to see. I'm not negotiating for him. And those talks aren't happening just yet, but I think very soon they're going to get underway.
Yeah. When it comes time for John Tavares, we'll definitely be all over that. Can you give me one big thought on each of the remaining playoff series? We can start with Dallas Edmonton, since that was Sunday. And Edmonton just pulling out all the stops for their Game 3 victory over Dallas. They're in the driver's seat right now.
Yeah, it's been a more interesting series for me than the scores say. Like, Dallas probably Game 3 controlled more of the play, I want to say. Which isn't to take anything away from Edmonton. Stuart Skinner put in a great performance. The Oilers got a goal at the end of the second period to get it to 3-1. And then, I think that really carried them to a strong finish in the third. But it was a more competitive game than 6-1 looks like. And I think you could say the same of the others earlier in the series. I actually am quite fascinated by this series the way it is. There's a lot of lot of push and pull, and look at it. I'd love to see a 3-2 for it. Like, I'd love to see a close game, an overtime game, all those things. But I'm not. I picked the Oilers in this series, and I'm feeling reasonably good about that pick. But I'm not sitting here going like it's over. Like, I do not feel that at all. And Stuart Skinner, give him credit. We've even within this series, we've seen the extremes, right? He's had a shutout. He had a game where he let in a bunch of goals, and then this one was 1 goal against, but he was tremendous in the game. So, it's been a bit Jekyll and Hyde. Inverted that. Jekyll and Hyde from him. Zach Hyman's hitting everything that moves. I mean, look, I think what you're seeing with the Oilers is the experience. Like, they know how to play. They know what it takes this time of year. It's not to say Dallas doesn't. They've been in conference final enough themselves and are looking to just take that one next step. So I still find it a very compelling series. My one big thought is, Edmonton's in the driver's seat now. I mean, getting back home, getting ahead 2-1, putting yourself a shot to take a 3-1 lead, is pretty enticing when it comes to getting back to that Stanley Cup. And I mean, Edmonton had to fight through a lot of indifferent stretches of this season. A lot of things going on with their team. They weren't performing at a certain level, but they were doing it saying, like, with late May in mind. And now it's down to execution time for them. And so, I mean, look, they've set themselves up, in my eyes, for another chance at Lord Stanley, but they got to go get the job done. And Dallas is obviously a great team. And I don't think they're going to go quietly. I mean, there's a bunch of pucks behind Ottinger in game 3, but wouldn't surprise me if he came out with a shutout in game 4. I mean, that's kind of what I just think. That's what I mean. There's a lot of push and pull. Like, I could see bounce backs in a lot of directions there. So I still think this is going 6 or 7 myself.
I know this happened earlier in the series, but what did you think of Connor McDavid going out of his way to say, yes, our team does play defense?
I loved it. I mean, I've loved the attitude of the Oilers the whole time. Like, even game 1, where it got away from them in the third period, there's like the shot of Draisaitl and McDavid on the bench, and they're like, I love that. I love that they didn't complain about the penalties they took in that game 1. I know I've probably covered some of this. Like, I just feel like they really know what it takes. They really, like, there is no one is seeking any individual credit there. They're just like, they just want to win a Stanley Cup so damn bad. And I think, like, lots of other teams think they want it, but I don't think they always end up acting in a way that shows that. Like, I just see it in everything Edmonton does. Like, even when they struggle or where areas of their game drop, like, the way they bounce back, like the way Stuart Skinner talks about his performance after a tough game. Like, I just think these guys are so resilient, mentally strong, on the ball, focused, however you want to frame that. And so I love the McDavid quote there. Like, they do play defense. And, whether they're good enough, we'll see. Like, their roster might not be as good as last year, but they do have right now a healthy Evander Kane, which they didn't have when they got to the final stages of last year's playoffs. And, they've mixed and matched. Klingberg has looked pretty good. Like, I got to tell you that's turned out to be a nice signing. For a guy coming off of all the time he had off with his hip issues. They found it, but it's the top guys pulling the chain, and no one else can copy the Oilers, right? Like, no one else has McDavid and Draisaitl. I know we're about to get to Florida here. What's interesting is I think to a degree you could seek to copy what Florida does well. Now often imitation doesn't mean you're going to create something better, but I think that what I see as Florida's secret sauce truly is they just have absolute buy-in through their lineup. They've found and identified the right players, acquired them, put them in the right places, and they are just freaking relentless. Like, they never let their foot off the gas. They're like a 20-man pack, and really it's like a 25-man pack because they swap all these guys in and out on the fourth line, and everyone, they seem to score, whether it's Jesper Boquist coming in, AJ Greer had a goal, Gadjevich has scored. Like it just feels like they bring it. And I think you could seek to try to build that. Again, not easy. If it was easy, lots of other teams would be going potentially to 3 straight cup finals, which Florida's knocking at the door of doing. So anyway, it's a way of saying this is really starting to feel like a Stanley Cup rematch, man. I mean, I've been getting those vibes. I'm guessing you're feeling the same.
Yeah. Like it feels like Carolina. No, I don't want to sound like I'm disrespecting them, and I get that like the 15 consecutive.
They are getting their ass handed to them in the Eastern Conference Final. So I mean, there's no way around that. We can't really sugarcoat the results in this third round for the Hurricanes.
No, 15 consecutive losses in the Eastern Conference Final, dating back to when Barack Obama was president. Like, what are we doing here? Like, Carolina right now, look, they've been a great team. They've found ways to get themselves to these spots in the conference finals. They're just not good enough against this Florida Panthers team, which I mean this as a compliment. They're playing like bullies and are just up and down miles better than the Carolina Hurricanes are. It hasn't been that close.
No. And here's the thing. The reality is maybe no one's good enough to handle that, right? Like that the takeaway might ultimately be in 3 weeks' time that just nobody could handle that. Like from a certain point in that Leaf series in round 2, they stepped it up. And if you look at, they've won 7 of 8 games right now, heading into Monday's chance to sweep the Eastern Conference Final, booked their third straight trip to the Stanley Cup Final. I mean, what's crazy is Tampa did it immediately before them in 2021 and 22 in the Eastern Conference. So they might follow with 23, 24, 25. But before that, it was like the Oilers were the last team to do it in the 80s. So, to get to 3 Cup Finals historically is not something that's achieved too often. But maybe nobody's up to that level. I mean, clearly the Hurricanes are. Like that's your takeaway. If you're watching those games, if you're anywhere in the Hurricanes organization, like this has got to be a really dispiriting, humbling, awful experience. But they are farther away than they were 2 years ago when they faced Florida and got swept in the conference final. At least one of those games went to like 4 overtimes or whatever that they lost, and then they get swept after that. And you could probably tell yourself a story about, man, if we had won that overtime, there's no but in this performance. I mean, they're a long ways off. At least in this series right now. Now they're a very thoughtful organization. I expect them to take this, I'm sure emotionally right now, but I expect them to be more level-headed about it, by the time it gets to the end of June and they're making decisions for their team bigger picture. Cause I've always had them as a team circled that I think will want to be, a big player this offseason. That wouldn't change if this was a 7-game series. And quite honestly, the thing I'm now most fascinated about Florida, they finish off this sweep, Julian, on Monday. They're going to have 12 days until game 1 of the Cup Final. Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final is on June 7th. So, and I know they had the long break 2 years ago before playing Vegas, and half their team was injured, and even that long break didn't help. But I wonder, is that the only thing that can slow them down, is like having that much time off? Admittedly, I'm twisting myself in a pretzel trying to think of things, but 12 days off is a long time in the playoffs, and that's what they're staring down the barrel at right now.
If you have that much time off, like, what are you doing as a player? I know you're trying to hang out with your teammates, you're practicing, but like, this would be great if we had like a coach who's been in that situation before, or if they go on and win, it'd be great to hear what Paul Maurice says about this. But I'm really curious to know, like, what does a team do when you have that much time off in between series?
Well, you probably take a couple days right after this, knowing you have that break where you don't, maybe guys that want to skate can skate, but you literally take a couple days off the ice. I'm sure you allow your team to blow off a bit of steam. Like the 2012 LA Kings ripped through that playoffs, and they've talked about that. Like the time between rounds, they'd have like a big party once just to like get the excitement out, whatever, and then, work yourself back into shape. You have time to kind of do that. Whereas obviously, remember too, though, that like Florida won Game 7 in Toronto and then 2 nights later started in Carolina. So they have been on a pretty mean run the last, couple weeks to get to this point. So I'm sure that a little bit of time off won't hurt. And then you're just practicing, you're getting ready, you're focusing on the opposition. The hilarious thing is, whether they face Edmonton or Dallas, they're the road team in the Cup Finals. So part of this is you're just waiting to eventually go on the road before the series starts. But, I feel like this is a team that's seen everything. Winning so many series in the last few years and winning it like the same core group of guys and Maurice and Bill Zito, like the management's intact. I just think they know how to get their business done. But let's face reality. The facts are the facts. Like you don't play a game for 2 weeks almost. I mean, it might feel weird when you get in that first game. And the first game, usually the cup final feels weird. It's two teams generally that don't know each other well. Now, if it ends up being Edmonton, Florida, maybe there's some of that because they faced each other last year. But, it's unique, but the reason this trophy is so hard to win is there's all kinds of problems, right? Some teams are probably saying, we haven't had any rest, and Florida's issue if they finish off the Hurricanes, which all indications suggest that this is going to be a 4-game Eastern Conference final. Then they got to deal with a huge layoff and try to make the best use of it possible.
So we'll have to wait and see on that. You're right. Game 4, Florida has to win Game 4 in order to give themselves that lengthy of a break. Let's get to the World Championship. Team USA, for the first time in 92 years, world champions. Thank you to the overtime goal from Tage Thompson against Switzerland in the gold medal final. I know you love the World Championship. What do you think of USA's victory?
I can't believe it took 92 years. More specifically, just because, let's face it, for the last 10 or 20 years, the U.S. has routinely been winning the under 18, the under 20, which is a World Junior tournament at the men's level. Like they've won so much that you just wonder, like, how did it not happen before now? What's interesting here is they won it with the youngest team in the tournament, average age of 24. Now, they had some nice veteran guys on the team, like Zach Werenski had a great tournament. Thompson, as you mentioned, was one of their older players. Clayton Keller was there wearing the captaincy. But, they waited 92 years. I'd be surprised if they wait 3 more years before winning their next one. Like, I just think we're at that stage for USA hockey. And I think it's a big breakthrough, honestly. The reality of the World Championship is no country has all of its best players. Denmark had a miracle run in this tournament. Got to the bronze medal game, knocked Canada out since we last recorded. Crazy upset, maybe one of the biggest upsets, if not the biggest in tournament history. But they didn't even have Freddie Anderson, right? Like, it's a country that doesn't have all of its best players, and it's a country that only has a few players. USA Hockey was missing, obviously, many, many top American stars. Even as great as Team Canada was, with McKinnon and Crosby and Celebrini and everyone down the line, they still didn't have the absolute best lineup you could have. So my point is that's a fact of life in this tournament. You still got to win it though every once in a while. And the fact that they got it done with so many young guys that have previously won a World Juniors or the under 18s or both. To me, it's just like another underlining that the U.S.'s time to potentially be the dominant nation in hockey is probably getting closer. I know Canada in particular is going to push back against that and want to fight against that. And we get to watch this all play out, thankfully, starting with the Olympics in February. But, really compelling event. I'd be remiss if I didn't note how special it was, how they included Johnny Gaudreau, bringing his sweater up as they accepted the championship trophy. They also honored him in the dressing room after the game. They had a stall for him and Matthew, his brother, who were killed obviously last year. Some people might not know this or might have forgotten, but Johnny Gaudreau played for the U.S. at this tournament last year. It was where he played his last competitive hockey with Team USA a year ago in the Czech Republic, or Czechia. So, I liked how they kept his spirit alive. Zach Werenski basically dedicated the gold medal to Johnny Gaudreau, his good friend. Really compelling final. Switzerland is the other side of this, and we won't talk much about this, but Switzerland is clearly beyond the big 4 in hockey: Canada, US, Sweden, and Finland. Switzerland is clearly 5 nowadays. Anyone who might not, if you're not paying attention, you might have missed that. I guess, look, the Czechs did win the gold at the men's worlds last year, but Switzerland's been to back-to-back finals. They're going to host the men's worlds next year. Switzerland's coming as a hockey nation as well. And they played a great final, but Tage Thompson gets the big golden goal and it's a history maker. But as I say, I don't think we'll be long before this is just a normal occurrence in the hockey world.
Amen. The sport is better by having more and more competition. I know people think about that at the women's level too, but also particularly at the men's level, it should be the case. You can't just have it where one country wins it every single time. It's good to have competition. And while I also am anticipating the United States getting way better at these competitions than they've ever been before, it's supposed to be a good thing to see different nations stack up and see how far it's come for hockey in those particular nations. And that includes Switzerland. And to see Denmark get to that point, we got to spend a second on that too. The fact that they were able to get that upset win over Canada, still an absolute shock.
Yeah, it's a stunner. I had it on, and that was right when the Shanahan news broke, was late in that third period. So like I saw it in the corner of my eye as I was kind of doing my thing there. I didn't actually go back and watch exactly how it unfolded, but I know enough to know that Canada had carried most of the play through the game, got a 1-0 lead early in the third, but Denmark poured it on. Denmark had a pile of shots in that third period, and obviously Ehlers gets a goal, and then Olesen, I believe it was, scored the winner. But I didn't actually get a chance to go back and watch it. I saw how upset the Canadian players were. But yeah, I mean, crazy outcome and big picture. I mean, it doesn't matter that I'm Canadian. It's great for the tournament when that sort of thing happens. I still think it's a great tournament. The one thing I want to mention just really quickly for those that maybe don't pay attention to it that closely that are listeners, but Sweden and Finland both kind of unhappy with their results in this event. I mean, especially Finland goes out in the quarterfinals. They've had a new coach the last couple of years, Antti Pennanen. He was with them at the Four Nations. Like, I wonder if he's still their coach come the Olympics. I think it's a big decision. I'm not saying he's out, but it seems like he's maybe not on the same page as some of there weren't many NHL players on this Finnish team, but it seems like maybe they have to make a decision. And Sam Hallam in Sweden, Sweden did win the bronze medal on home ice, but they got blown out by the Americans in the semifinal, and they haven't had very many inspiring results of late either. And it seems like a few NHL players have kind of questioned him. Even Eric Gustafsson during this tournament gave an interview in Sweden where he's like, I don't know why I'm the seventh defenseman. I can't do anything watching from the bench. He wasn't happy that he'd been basically bumped down the lineup when Rasmus Sandin arrived. It just seems like there's some more unrest in Sweden and Finland with those teams. And ahead of the Olympics, I just think it's interesting. Like, what do you do if you're the federations? Just keep an eye on Ole Jokinen. I know I've mentioned him before, but he's a up and coming coach in Finnish circles. I just wonder if he finds his way maybe to the national team as a coach at some point here.
The note about Sam Hallam reminds me of when the Senators season ended and we wondered aloud if Linus Ullmark would join the team, and Linus told us he would not be joining the team, and he expressed some disappointment at that. So this kind of rings true with what I've heard about that with regards to him too. He was very disappointed that he was not able to join Team Sweden for a tournament in his own backyard, no less. Like, that's very fascinating.
And they had Jacob Markstrom there. I mean, he had a tough game in that semifinal. I mean, look, I'll just say this. When your team isn't winning, things splinter a bit, right? So, like, I don't, there's a lot of factors here, but it just seems like in both those countries, there's not the right spirit between the coach, the players, the federation. Like, it feels like things are a bit disjointed because they haven't had results. Obviously, those two countries, finished third and fourth. And I know it's just the Four Nations tournament, but you wonder entering an Olympics. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on everyone to perform at the Olympics, and just something to watch here, I guess, as we go forward.
For sure. Let's do a quick Ask CJ before we get on out of here. A couple questions off of X, Blue Sky, Discord. Zahid wants to know, could you really see a Morgan Reilly trade happen this offseason?
I think it's unlikely, but, I can't rule it out entirely because I do believe the Leafs have to look at, we're past the point of, everything just stays the same. But, in Reilly's case, he has a full no movement clause. They would have to satisfy that. And, I still think he performs an important function on the team. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, you're getting rid of him. I mean, they already probably lack a little offensive flair on their blue line right now. Don't get me wrong. I love some of what Brad Treliving's done with this blue line, but it's definitely been with more of a defensive bent. I mean, I just don't know how you replace his offensive minutes and his ability to get the puck up to having the skilled forwards they do. So I think it's a low percentage thing. I don't think he's of any mind to be moved, and I don't know how you're getting better while removing him from the equation. But I will acknowledge, I mean, it's high past time in Toronto to at least consider some big changes. Marner might be one, but no reason necessarily to stop there if there's other things that can be improved.
Chaotic Neutral wants to know, I am dying to know why Jay Woodcroft hasn't gotten a coaching job yet. It seems really baffling to me, and I was wondering if CJ has any insight into it.
I don't have specific insight there. I think that we're at a time where, there's been a lot of turnover. So There's guys with more experience than Jay, and then it seems like the teams that might hire someone like Jay, who's had the one head coaching experience in the NHL with Edmonton, are opting to go with some younger looks, right? Looking to find maybe the next Spencer Carberry, which of course could still be Jay Woodcroft. I mean, who am I to say? But, I've been a little surprised, because he was fired at the start of last season. So he went through last summer without getting a job, and, it doesn't appear, at least to me, unless there's a surprise, that he's going to get one of the remaining head coaching jobs that are out there available. Perhaps it's a case where he's going to have to take a step back, which has happened to a number of coaches, and, bide his time as a number two somewhere and wait for that opportunity to be a head coach again. But, it didn't end great for him in Edmonton. That Oilers team was at the bottom of the league, or second last, when he was fired in November of 2023. And, they went on to the Stanley Cup that same season. And then now they're having a lot of success now. So maybe that simple fact has hurt him a little bit, but I think it's also a reflection of, a lot of teams are looking for the next coach, and he's been passed by. I mean, it's hard to say any one reason. I know he did interview last year in New Jersey for the job that went to Sheldon Keefe. I know they thought really highly that they thought he interviewed very well. And so I don't think that that's the issue. It's just the right fit hasn't come along, is maybe the best way to put it.
Charlie wants to know any info on Jonathan Toews. Will he play next season? Thoughts on Winnipeg or Toronto signing him?
I don't know if he's going to play next season. It does appear, though, that he's giving the comeback a real try. He's been skating for quite some time now. I've seen on social media doing work with Adam Oates a little bit, and, really trying to put himself in a position. And that's one thing Jonathan's been open about in talking, is he just didn't know if he could himself get back to a level where it makes sense. I don't know if he's made that decision yet, but the fact he still continues to be training as a hockey player, I think, is an encouraging sign. And, my understanding always was that he was open to the potential of Winnipeg. Maybe a Toronto. I don't think that he had one place in mind. I think he wants to be somewhere where he can be part of the puzzle. And really the hardest part, probably for both Jonathan, but any team that might look to sign him, assuming this comeback continues and becomes more of a reality, is what can you expect of him at this stage? I mean, it's an unknown. I believe he's 37 years old, which makes him among the oldest skaters in the league nowadays. Still very young in human years, but he's a long way removed from his best days as a player. Now, can he, the one thing that was always an edge for him, I think, was the way he thought the game and between the ears. Presumably he's still got those instincts and that ability, but, I'd love to see him back. I got to say, selfishly, it just would be cool to see a guy who's been through a lot with his health, has shared that journey openly. It'll be cool to see him, whether it's in his hometown in Winnipeg or, Toronto, wherever it ends up being, Colorado. I mean, anywhere that he chooses to play, I think would be pretty cool if he can make it happen. I mean, I just think of the reaction when Gabriel Landeskog came back in these playoffs. It's not quite the same thing, but it's a little bit similar. I mean, this was taken away from Toews, his hockey career, by something that was beyond him. And it appears he's at least trying to reclaim that a little bit. And that's where I see the parallels with Gabriel Landeskog.
Yeah, I think you'd get a similar reaction for sure. Last one for you from Kadri Sens. How do you see the Senators' blue line shaking up this summer with Nick Jensen's surgery? Do they add another top 4 D-man or an upgrade on Artem Zub? I can help you with this one if you need.
You take it. You field this one, my friend.
Like, I think with Nick Jensen's surgery, the lower body surgery, from what I remember Bruce Garriock reporting, I think it really depends on what ends up happening with that Claude Giroux contract. They right now have a little over 17 mil, almost 18 mil in space. Depending on what ends up happening with him, that determines on how much space they'll have to try to get a goal scorer or a top defenseman. I think they could use an upgrade on Nick Jensen. I know he played really well with Thomas Chabot this last year, but you could probably still plug in another defenseman for depth. I still think the Sens, if anything, they'll probably prioritize getting a goal scorer more than anything else this offseason, though.
Right. I mean, it seems to me they have a need on the right side, or someone who can play the right side. Mm-hmm. Newsflash, a lot of teams are in the same spot, but, maybe it isn't a high impact guy. But with Hamonic moving on, it just feels like there's definitely one seat to be be warm there. It's funny. Just my brain has like unlocked this thing I haven't thought about in a few weeks. But I mean, that Sanderson performance against the Leafs in the first round is one thing that stands out to me watching those games, the 6 of them, live and in person. So that the Sens are in pretty good hands on the blue line. Clevin had, some great moments in that series too, but clearly I could see one more veteran player being brought in. I have a hard time thinking though it's going to be a big splashy name necessarily, maybe someone more to stabilize things.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Anyway, this podcast has run its length. Adam Wilde would say this is the equivalent of 2 podcast episodes he would like. Anyway, thank you so much for tapping in. We'll be back later this week with more content and more coverage on the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Leafs press conference to come, and so much more going on in the hockey world. Great work as always, CJ.
Thanks, buddy. And we'll probably get some coach hirings this week too. I know we didn't get into that, but I think a few of those teams are winding towards the finish here. I mean, it's almost June, man. Crazy. The off season really gets going the first week of June. And so we're basically knocking at the door another week until we're there.
Can't wait. All this and more on The Chris Johnston Show. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.